And so in the first place, you may have heard that Israel is a settler colonialist project and a manifestation of Western imperialism and maybe even of white supremacy. Has anybody heard this? Everybody's heard this. So, the reality is, however, that the people who are standing against Israel and in favor of Hamas today on campuses are the latest exponents and often the useful idiots of the longest-lasting settler colonialist project in history. And they are the ones who are calling for imperialism and conquest. It is not the other way around. Now, the proof of this in the first place is simply the incidence of Arabic speakers in that region. All the way across from Iraq to Morocco, all across the Middle East and North Africa, they speak Arabic. What is Arabic? Arabic is the language that comes from Arabia. Arabia is not Morocco or Algeria or Libya or Sudan or Egypt or Syria or Lebanon or Jordan or Iraq. Arabia is Arabia. Why do all those countries speak Arabic? Why do many of them have native languages that are pretty much dead now? Do you know, have you ever heard of Coptic in Egypt? Do you know what Coptic means? Egyptian. That's the word Egypt. Copt and Egypt, it's the same thing. It's two variations on how to transliterate the word from the original Egyptian or Coptic language. In Egypt, when the Arabs conquered it in the 7th century, the ruling class spoke Arabic, and the conquered people spoke Coptic or Egyptian. And ultimately, over time, because the colonialists were so oppressive and they created rules that so oppressed the natives, but all the natives had to do to be free of the oppression was to convert to Islam and become Arabic speakers, Coptic began to die out. And in 1501, it was actually outlawed. It was made against the law to speak the native language of the land. And so now, there's hardly anybody that speaks Egyptian or Coptic, even the Coptic Christians who are about 10% of Egypt. There are Berber languages in the western part of North Africa, around Morocco and Algeria, gone. There are people trying to revive them now, but they were obliterated by the massive settler colonialist project that is Islam. Islam is an aggressive and imperialistic religion, and it is the key to understanding the Israel-Hamas conflict. Islam teaches this in chapter 8, verse 39. If you open up your Qur'ans to chapter 8, verse 39, you will see, "Fight them until persecution is no more, and religion is all for Allah." Fight them until persecution is no more, and religion is all for Allah. Now let's think about that for a minute. In the first place, it says to fight them. So this is supposed to be the perfect word of the Supreme Being that existed forever in paradise with that Supreme Being until he decided to send it down by means of an angel to a prophet, a man named Muhammad, in Arabia in the 7th century. That's the story. And so, fight them becomes a sacred act. It's not just war for purposes of defense or purposes of conquest or any other reason. It's war because it is a command of God. If you are a Jew or a Christian, or you are familiar with Judaism or Christianity, you may have heard of the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, etc. And those things are considered to be divine commands that are not negotiable. And this is the same thing. If the Quran says fight them, then that's a divine command that's not negotiable. Then it says, until persecution is no more. So you get the idea that the fight is in defense because you're being persecuted. And so that's reasonable, right? If people are persecuting you, you can fight them. But that's not where it stops. It says, fight them until persecution is no more, and religion is all for Allah. Allah being the supreme being in Islam. It is generally considered to be the Arabic word for God, but it's really the God, as in the God that is designated in the Quran, the holy book of Islam. And so that's why the profession of faith in Islam says there is no God but Allah. La Allah illa Allah. There is no God but Allah. Allah is a very specific God who is the God of Islam. And the religion has to be all for him. So if you were a Jew or a Christian or something else, if you were a Hindu or a Buddhist, if you were an atheist, your religion is not all for Allah. That means they have a divine command to fight you. You can be minding your own business, not paying attention to them at all. You don't bear them any ill will. You are certainly not fighting them. You don't care about them. You're living your life, and they have a divine command to fight you. Does this mean that every Muslim is going to fight you and hates you? No. But it does mean that those who do understand it as a divine command, a holy struggle, and those don't end. You don't sit down at a negotiating table and say, we're going to negotiate away the divine command. Yes, God said in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not steal, but we're going to make this agreement and sign it that says stealing is okay. It's not going to happen. And it's the same thing. In Islam, it is not possible to lay aside that command. And so the war against Israel will never be settled by some kind of an agreement or a negotiated settlement. It'll never happen because their religion is not all for Allah. And so they have to be fought. And there's more, too. The land that is Israel has been the land of the Jews since time immemorial. There's abundant archaeological evidence of this. There is historical evidence of this. As a matter of fact, you ever heard of the West Bank? All right, did you know that the West Bank has only been called the West Bank since 1950? What was it called before 1950? Judea and Samaria. The Jordanians were occupying the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, in 1950, and they changed the name of it from Judea and Samaria to the West Bank. Why did they do that? Because West Bank doesn't sound like anything. You know, what does it mean? It could be TD Bank. It doesn't mean anything. But Judea and Samaria, Judea, what does that mean? That's the land of the Jews. That's what that means. So they couldn't call it that when they were saying it wasn't that, you see. But Judea was always the land of the Jews. That's why it was called that. In 134 AD, the Romans, remember the Roman Empire? In 134 AD, the Romans had this recalcitrant people that they had conquered that kept rebelling against them, the Jews. And so the Romans expelled the Jews from the area of Judea in the year 134. And they thought, in order to really rub it in order to make them feel even worse, we will not only exile them from their homeland, but we will change the name of their homeland to the name of their ancient enemy from their holy book. So they looked into the Bible to see who the Israelites had been fighting. And they found the name of a long extinct people that the Israelites were fighting in the Bible. What were they called? The Philistines. And so they named the place in their own language Palestine in 134. Palestine was never the name of an ethnicity, never the name of a people, never the name of a nation. So now these dweebs come to you on campus and they say, we are fighting to free Palestine. Well, from what exactly? Palestine is Judea, the land of the Jews. And it was renamed in order to emphasize that it no longer belonged to the Jews. But if the Jews were to return to their homeland of Judea, it's where they would go. So, the problem here comes in with Islam. When the Arabs conquered Palestine in the 7th century, then it became part of the Abbasid Caliphate and later on the Ottoman Turks. Now, the caliphates consider that they are the perfect land where Allah's law is in place, the land where the perfect law of Allah is implemented. And there is a very simple thing in the Quran, a very simple statement in chapter 2, verse 191. Drive them out from where they drove you out. Now, what that means in practice, drive them out from where they drove you out, is that any land that they ever had as part of the caliphate is part of Islamic land forever, because they have another divine command to throw out anybody who might come live there after them. So, Spain was part of the Islamic Caliphate, and they lost it in the Reconquista. And so there are Muslims who believe that they have a divine command to fight to retake Spain. And the land that is now Israel was part of the caliphates, and so there are Muslims who believe they have a divine command to retake that land. But when they are retaking it, they are reasserting the original imperialist colonialist project that conquered it in the first place. So this is not an attempt to liberate an oppressed people. That's a lie. This is an attempt to reassert a colonialist victory that was part of the expulsion and the attempted obliteration of the indigenous people. And so you have to be aware of these things and challenge them and be absolutely unintimidated and unafraid to challenge their narrative on campus in every detail. And so even when they tell you we're fighting for the Palestinians, you know, we're fighting because the Palestinians are oppressed and we're against oppression, and it sounds good superficially. Okay, ask them, where were the Palestinians before the 1960s? Give me one piece of evidence from 1948 when the State of Israel was founded, or 1938 or 28 or 1808 or 1808 or 1708 or 1650 or 1550 or any time back, any mention of the Palestinians anywhere. When the Romans established Palestine, renaming Judea, find me a mention of Palestinians. There isn't any. You can't find one. It's most striking when you go to the 1948 controversies about the founding of the modern state of Israel, and you look at the United Nations deliberations, where the United Nations partitioned the mandate for Palestine, which was for the establishment of a Jewish national home, that is the State of Israel. And they cut it in half because the Arabs kept killing Jews and claiming the whole land for themselves. So they cut this tiny piece of territory in half to establish a Jewish state and a 23rd Arab state. And the Arabs said, no, we don't want it. We want the whole thing, and we're going to fight a war to destroy Israel right now. But in all that time, in all those UN deliberations and the subsequent war between Israel and the 5 neighboring Arab states, not a single mention of Palestinians. And when that war ended in 1949, the Jordanians had control over Judea and Samaria, that is what they renamed the West Bank the next year. And the Egyptians had control of Gaza. And that occupation continued until 1967, when Israel won those territories back, which were part of the original mandate for the Jewish national home, and reclaimed them as part of the State of Israel, and ended the occupation of the Jordanians and the Egyptians. But from 1949 to 1967, try to find me a single word about occupation, about Gaza and the West Bank being occupied territory. Even though Jordan was an occupying power and Egypt was an occupying power, nobody said a word about the poor Palestinians or said a word about how they were occupied. Why not?
Because it wasn't theirs.
Because it wasn't theirs. Because the Egyptians and the Jordanians were Muslims, and the Palestinian Arabs were Muslims. And so, as far as they were concerned, it was once again part of the Ummah, the global Islamic community, and the infidels had been driven out. Remember, drive them out from where they drove you out, and consequently, there was nothing to complain about. Nobody said anything about Palestinian self-determination or independence or statehood, nothing, because the Palestinians did not yet exist. What happened was the Palestinians were established in the 1960s, and it was the greatest propaganda victory or success in the history of propaganda. The KGB of the Soviet Union supported the people trying to destroy Israel for a very simple reason. The United States supported Israel. And so in those days, everything was either, you're in the Cold War, you're either with the United States or with the Soviets. So the Soviets supported the Arabs. And so the Soviets met with Yasser Arafat, the leader of the Palestine Liberation Organization, in 1964, and got him to change the name of it to the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Hardly anybody noticed. It seemed like the same thing. What's the big deal? Palestine, Palestinian. Well, there was a Palestine. It was just the name of a territory. To change it to Palestinian was to assert the existence of this people that nobody had ever heard of before and that never existed before. And they created this even tinier people to counter the narrative of Israel as this great underdog facing off against 22 giant Arab states and the other Muslim non-Arab states like Iran that wanted to destroy it. And now you had this even tinier people facing off against the mighty IDF. But it's all fake. There's no Palestinian people. They're Arabs, ethnically, linguistically, culturally, and religiously exactly the same as the Arabs of Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. So why didn't they just move to Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan when they were exiled out of Israel? Because they weren't exiled out of Israel. The Israelis asked them to stay. The Arab Higher Committee told them, you better leave because we're going to obliterate Israel. We don't want you to be in the line of fire. And so they left. Then all the Arab states lost the war. And so things didn't work out for them to be able to come back as easily as they thought they would. But then the Lebanese and Syrians and Jordanians said, no, you can't become citizens. Why not? You know, there were population transfers after World War II on a massive scale. Have you ever looked at a map of Europe before World War II and compared it to after World War II and see how much smaller Germany is? Why? Because Germany started a world war and lost. And so the surrounding states thought, we need to protect ourselves against these people and make sure they don't do it again. And we're going to take some of their territory. It's going to be a punitive thing and a self-defense thing. And that's been a right of warfare recognized throughout history. And the Germans moved from what is now Poland and what is now Russia, and they moved back into what remains of Germany. Nobody said a word about it. Nobody protested. Everybody understood. This is what happens in wars. So the Jordanians and the Egyptians and the other Arab states lost a series of aggressive wars against Israel. But Israel is not allowed to reclaim the territory that was part of the original mandate. And now there's this myth that there's this occupied territory and that Israel has no genuine claim to the region. What is really happening is this is a reinforcement of this massive 1,400-year-old colonialist project to conquer and Islamize all of the non-Muslim territories in the entire world. There's no limit to fight them until persecution is no more and religion is all for Allah. It keeps going as long as there's somebody whose religion is not all for Allah. And so it's going to come here too, ultimately. But if they suffer a defeat in Israel at this time, then they're set back for a while, and they understand the world in terms of strength and weakness. So that could be a great boon to the entire free world. But right now, if it's up to your friends and colleagues on campus, that won't happen, and the jihad will be enabled and emboldened to strike here and elsewhere. So I commend you for standing on the front lines. I hope you found this informative.